Today's shiur begins 3 lines from the top of Daf Hey. We should mention that we are, in effect, continuing the topic we discussed in our previous shiur, the latter part of our previous shiur, dealing with the attribute of haughtiness and how one should avoid behaving thusly. On the 3rd line from the top, the Gemara asks, Azhora legase haruach minayin. Where do you find a scriptural reference prohibiting behavior of that nature, haughtiness? Omar Rava, Omar Zeiri, Shimu v'hazinu al tigbo. So you see in this pasuk, al is an expression meaning do not, and the word tigbo is from the shoresh, from the root of gavoa, to be high, lofty, or in this case, high spirit, haughtiness. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar Mehocha. From the following, we have the azhara, the negative command concerning haughtiness. V'rom levavcha v'shochachta. Uksiv hishomer l'cha pen tishkach es Hashem Elokecha. So the first citation, V'rom levavcha, has to do with a haughty spirit, and then v'shochachta, through haughtiness, one forgets the Almighty. And concerning forgetfulness, it says, Hishomer l'cha pen tishkach es Hashem Elokecha. You see the words Hishomer and the word pen, Uchidarebi Ovin Omer Rab Ilah, the Omer Rab Ovin Omer Rab Ilah, Kol Mokim Shinema Hishomer Pen Ve'al, wherever one of these words appears, Eino Elo Beloy Saseh. It indicates a negative command. So that when you see Hishomer Locha Pen Tishkach Es Hashem, where does Shikha come from? Where does forgetfulness of the Almighty come from? From V'rom Levavcha. And concerning forgetting Hashem, you have a negative command in the form of Hishomer Locha Pen Tishkach. Dorash Rav Avira. Zimnin Omar Le Mishmei Ravasi v'Zimnin Omar Le Mishmei Ravami. We saw this marking in our previous shiur, featuring Rav Avira's drushes. Sometimes in the name of Ravasi, sometimes in the name of Rav Ami. Kol Adam Sheyesh Bo Yigasus HaRuach. Anyone who possesses that quality of haughtiness, L'Soif Misma'et. Eventually he will fall from his supposed importance. Shenemar Romu Me'at. Romu has to do with haughtiness, and then Me'at becoming reduced to little. V'shema Toimar Yeshno Ba'olam. You might say, alright, so he's reduced, but he remains. Talmud Lomar V'einenu. In that very same pasuk that you can see, we've quoted on the side of our marked Gemaras, you see that it says V'einenu. V'im Choser Bo, and if he atones, if he repents, Ne'esaf Bizmanoi Ke'avram Avinu. So he will merit then living a full life, and Ne'esaf means to be collected from living and eventually die in his right time. As was the case with Avram Avinu. Shenemar, V'humchu. V'humchu has to do with lowliness, humility. Kechol yikpotsun. And the idea of yikpotsun means to be gathered in. So that in the pasuk you see, with humility, kechol yikpotsun. And what is the significance of the word kechol that we dashed underline? K'avram, Yitzchak v'Yaakov Techtiv Bahu, the forefathers concerning whom is written Bakol, Mikol, Kol. These words appear in different psukim in association with each one of the Avos, and Avram Avinu, one of them, being described as someone who lived a full life. V'im lav, however, if a person does not behave thusly, he doesn't repent, Ucharosh shiboilas imalu. This, of course, you can see is the end of pasuk Chav Daled of Eov Perek Chav Daled. My ucharosh shiboilas. What is the reference to the rosh? That means the top of a shibolis, of a stalk of grain. Rav Una v'Rav Chisda. Chad Omar ki sosa d'shibalta. We should have explained that in the pasuk Ucharosh Shibos Yimolo, Yimolo means to be cut off. You might be familiar with the word bris milah. Milah is a cutting. So it's a reference in the pasuk to a sheaf of grain, where the top is cut off. So one pshat, one explanation is a reference to the sosa of shibolta. These are fibers that extend beyond the top of a grain, and they would be described as being cut off. And such is the case with someone who remains haughty. V'chad Omar, and the other approach, you have Rav Huna and Rav Chisda. The other one explains kishiboles atzma. The karosh shiboles yimolo is a reference to the top of the grain, the stalk of grain itself, not a reference to the fibers that extend beyond, but the grain, the comb of grain itself. I understand well, according to the approach that says that karosh shiboles yimolo is a reference to the fibers that extend beyond the top of the grain. Hainu dichsiv. That is what the pasuk means when it says ucharosh shiboles, the head of the shiboles, the sheaf of grain. Elo laman diomar ki shibolta atzma, but the explanation that says it's a reference to the grain itself, to the grains, the comb of grains themselves. My ucharosh shiboles. What is the reference to the head of the shiboles when you are saying the pasuk is referring to the shiboles itself, to the comb of grains that appear at the top of the stalk itself? See, the term rosh indicates something extending beyond. But if you're explaining karosh shiboles yimolo as a reference to the grains themselves that grow at the top of the stalk, what is the role of the word rosh? Omar Rav Asi v'chein tana debei Rabbi Yishmael moshol le'adam shenichnas l'soich sadei. A person, an analogy to a person entering his field. Gavoya hu malakei. The tendency is to gather, to cut off those that are the tallest. The others, one will assume, are left to grow, to mature further, so that when you enter a field and you see certain grains growing taller than the rest, those are the ones that you will cut off first. So that haughtiness is being portrayed as a stalk of grain growing taller than the others. This idea of height, of high spirit, haughtiness is portrayed here. We continue with a pasuk from Yeshaya, Perek Nun Zayin, pasuk Tes Vav. We've quoted the entire pasuk on the side of the Gemara, and let's read it together. Kiko Amar Rom v'nisa shochenad v'kodosh shmoy morom v'kodosh eshkoin. The pasuk describes the Almighty who dwells on high. V'es dako shval ruach la'achyois ruach shvolim v'la'achyois leiv nitkoyim. The Almighty who dwells on high is together with those that are of contrite and humble spirit. Rav Huna v'Rav Chisda. In describing this v'es daka, the word daka is a person who is literally has to do with crushed down, but it's a person who is of humble spirit. So one approach is Chad Omar iti daka. That means that I, the Almighty, raises the humble unto me. V'chad Omar ani es daka. The other approach says that the Almighty, so to speak, descends down to be with the one of humble spirit. Umistabro kemadomar ani es daka. It's more likely, like the approach, the second approach, that He, the Almighty, descends down to be with the humble-spirited individual. Sherei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we find that the Almighty Hinich Kol Harei Mugvos, He abandoned all mountains and hills. V'hishru Shchinos Har Sinai, V'lo gova har Sinai lamala. He came in the giving of the Torah to have his divine presence dwell upon Mount Sinai, which was a lowly type mountain. V'lo gova har Sinai lamala, and didn't cause Mount Sinai to raise upwards, so that we see the idea of the Kodesh Baruch Hu Kiviyachol descending down to that which is lowly, as opposed to raising up the lowly to become very high. Omar Rav Yosef le'oilum yilmad odom midas koinoi. A person should always learn from the ways of the Creator. Sharei HaKodesh Baruch Hu niach kol horim uvos. We find the Almighty left behind all mountains and hills. V'hishu shchinaso har Sinai, and dwelled, his divine presence dwelled upon Mount Sinai, the lowly of mountains. Omar Rav Ozer, Kol Odom sheyesh bo gasas haruach roi ligadoi ka'ashera. Anyone who has this characteristic of haughtiness, he is fit to be cut down like an Asherah. Asherah is a tree that was worshipped in idolatry. You can see that we have, of course, a continued series concerning the people that have this quality of Gasas Ruach, and in the Gemara immediately you can see we have a double underline added marking to highlight a series of Rebbe Ozer comments on this topic. So Rebbe Ozer says that one who is a Gas Ruach, one who is haughty, is worthy or fit to be cut down like an Asherah tree. Ksivacha, in one pasuk in Yeshaya Perek Yud pasuk Yud Gimel, it says V'romei hakoyma geduim, the high spirited are cut down. Uksiv hasam, and there in the context of idolatrous trees that were used, that were worshipped in idolatry, it says V'asherehem tegadeon. So you have the word, the root of this being Gimel Dalet Ayin, Gadea or Godah, in both places, high-spirited and idolatrous trees. The Omer Rebbe Ozer, Kol Odom sheyesh bo yigatzes haruach ein afro nin'ar. Person who is haughty, his dust, the dust of decomposition after a person dies, will not arise upon the resurrection of the dead. Shneimar hakitzu v'rananu shoichnei ofar. That's the pasuk describing the arising of the Shochnei Ofar of the dead. Now, Shochnei Ofar is featured in the pasuk. Shichnei Ofar lo nemar doesn't say literally those that are lying in the dirt, a simple reference to corpses that are in the ground. Elo Shochnei Ofar. What is the significance of this term Shochnei Ofar? Mi shenase Shochen Ofar b'chayav. He who was like a neighbor of the dirt being that which is on the ground, that which is lowly. So someone who practiced a life of lowliness, of humility, he will merit hakitzu v'rananu, the resurrection of the dead. V'yomar Rebbe Ozer, Kol Adam sheyesh bo gasas haruach shchino mi'alelas alav. Anyone who has within him this characteristic of haughtiness, the divine presence bemoans him. Shneimar. Now here we have a quote from the pasuk in Tehillim Perek Kuf Lamed Ches pasuk Vov. Before reading the quote of the Gemara itself, the preceding words of this pasuk from Tehillim Kuf Lamed Ches pasuk Vov says Kirom Hashem v'shafal yireh, and the Gemara words we have here v'gavoa mimerchok yiyeda, and the expression yiyeda is a language of bemoaning, and Rashi points this out. If we look at Rashi across from here, a few lines up, V'gavoa mimerchak yiyeda, Reishei dekra, the beginning of the pasuk says, Kirom Hashem, the Almighty is lofty, the shafal yireh, the shafal means the lowly he will notice, V'gavoa, which is in our quote, v'hagavoa, the lofty one, the haughty one, mimerchok. What does that mean? Mikodem shetavolov puranos yomim rabim yiyeda. That before the suffering befalls him, shchina misayinenes umishtaberes olav kemo vayedal menusav. And there are other psukim that Rashi quotes indicating the word yud dalid ayin, indicating a bemoaning. So that the gavoa, the one who is haughty, mimerchok, way before. Merchok means the distance. Before the punishment befalls him, the Shechina, the divine presence, is already bemoaning him. And now we have another drasha of Rabbi Avira, and hence you can see this crown marking that we saw earlier. Dorash Rabbi Avira, V'itema Rabbi Ozer, Bo Urei. In this case, by the way, Rabbi Avira is quoting a different source than the names we saw him quoting earlier, but either Rav Avira, and some say Rebbe Ozer, and Rebbe Ozer would be part of the series that we just saw with the double underlines. So either Rabbi Avira or Rabbi Ozer says, "Bo re'ei, come and see shalok kamidas hakodesh baruch hu midas basar adam." The attributes of the Almighty are not like the attributes of man. Midas basar adam, the nature of man is gavoa roe es hagavoa, vein gavoa roe es hashafal. Someone who is very tall, when he stands without maneuvering his head, he will notice someone who is of similar height. So the tall sees the tall. Someone who is very tall will hardly notice someone who is short, who is low. Aval midas hakadosh baruch hu eino kain. Hu gavoa, the Almighty is lofty. V'roeh es hashafal, and He notices the humble, the lowly. Shenemar, the beginning of the pasuk that we saw before, is quoted here in the Gemara. Ki rom Hashem v'shafal yireh. The Almighty is way up there, is lofty, but He notices the shafal, the lowly, the ones of humble spirit. Amar Rav Chisda v'tema mar ukva. Kol adam sheyesh bo gasis haruach. Anyone who has this quality of haughtiness, Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu ein ani v'hu yecholim lodur ba'olam. I and he, the haughty one, cannot live together in this world. As the common saying goes, there isn't enough room in this world for the two of us. Shinemar, the pasuk says, Miloshni basei sereu oso atzmis. So in this pasuk, you notice we dashed underline geva, meaning the high one, the haughty one, and it says lo uchal al tikri oso. Instead of reading in this pasuk oso atzmis, read it as ito lo uchal. Let me just correct the detail. We read in the pasuk Gevai Naim Ruchav Levov Oso Lo Uchal. Instead of reading Oso Lo Uchal at the end of pasuk, you read Ito Lo Uchal, means together with him I cannot be. Ika Demasni Lo Amisapre Loshen Hara. There are those that explain this pasuk not in the context of the haughty ones, but rather regarding the speakers of Loshen Hara, the people who practice slanderous speech. The pasuk made reference to Malashne Baseser. That's from the word Loshon, those who speak Baseser in secret, people who want to defame others. They generally speak in whispers, in quiet, in a hushed form, telling their friends, telling stories about others. And in the pasuk it says, Malasha b'seisi re'ehu, one who speaks ill, speaks negative about his friends in quiet, also atzmi, such and such a person I will cut down. Omar Rebbe Alexander, kol odom sheish bo gases ruach, afilu ruach kimo oichrosai. He who is haughty, even a well, literally, a ruach kimo means kimo is something small, light. Ruach is a breeze, a light breeze, destroys him. The Meforshim explain ruach kimo is a reference to even a minor retribution will destroy him. Shenemar v'horashoyim kayom nigrash. The wicked, like the sea, kayom nigrash, and we explain. Uma yam sheyesh bo kamo revoyos. The sea has many revoyos. Revoyos is the pull of the word revius, a liquid measure. So there are many gallons of water in the sea. Ruach kimo chroso. A light breeze over the sea ruffles the sea. The entire sea is ruffled by even a light breeze. Adam shein bo elo l'revius achas alachas kama v'kama. A person who has in him let us say, a minimum amount of blood, which is sufficient for maintaining a person, is in the eyes of Chazal is termed a revius. It's a minimum amount of blood in a person is the minimum amount for life. So the sea, which has many revios in it, even a light breeze ruffles it. A person that has just one revius in him, all the more so. The Gemara continues. Omar of Chia, Abar Ashi, Omar Rav. Here we have a new marking, a diamond, and on the side, under the Nosay / Mivneh heading, the topic heading with a structural note combined, the diamond is featured, Gasus Ruach B'Talmidei Chachamim. Here we have a specific reference to haughtiness in Talmud, in Torah scholars. So Rav says, Talmud Chacham Tzorich Sheyeh Bo Echad Mishmoina B'Shminis. A Torah scholar needs to have a little bit of haughtiness in him, not too much, a little bit, an eighth of an eighth. Omar Rav Huna Braid Rav Yoshua Ma'atro Le Kisosa L'Shibota. And even the little haughtiness that he has in him must be covered like the fibers that cover the head of a grain. We saw before the analogy to haughtiness through a tall sheaf of grain with the fibers that extend beyond it, and hence you can see the continued use of that analogy in this context. The Rashi explains on the first wide line, Echod mishoyne b'shminis mishkal kotenhu. An eighth of an eighth is a reference to a very small weight. Vainu uchla. The name of that measure, that weight, is called an uchla. Klomar, what we're trying to tell you is, tzor shiebo ma'at gaiva. A Talmud Chacham has to have a little bit of haughty spirit to him, or let's say lofty spirit to him. Shelo yu kale harosh mistoylulin bo, so that the scoffers shouldn't take advantage, should not denigrate him. And through this little measure of haughtiness or high-spiritedness that a Talmud Chacham has, so his rulings will be imposed upon the Kale Harosh, the otherwise light-headed scoffer individuals in his midst. The Rashi goes on to say, gasus muat, a little bit of haughtiness, noeh v'hoigenes l'talmud chacham, is fitting for a Torah scholar, umatrosoi kisoso hamateres es hashibolos, and matroso, it serves as a crown upon him, like the fibers that sit atop a head of grain. We continue in the Gemara. Omar Rava, B'shamta de'ispe u'b'shamta de'lespe. B'shamta is a reference to being excommunicated. So B'shamta, one who de'ispe, that has in him gasus uruch, that has in him haughtiness, deserves excommunication. And B'shamta the lesbe, one who doesn't have a little bit of gasruch also deserves censuring. And as Rashi says on that, B'shamta the lesbe, gasis purta, Rashi on the third of the wide lines under the Gemara text, someone who lacks the minimum amount of gasus should be censured, because the people of his community will not fear him. Without this little bit of gasus, he doesn't have the power to chastise them. We continue in the Gemara. Omer of Nachbar Yitzchok, lo mina v'lo miktsasa. As far as I am concerned, he says, I don't want it, and I don't even want a little bit of it. And why do I want to have no part of gasus or ruach? Mizutu dichsiv beitoyev as Hashem kol gov alev. Is it a small matter, that which the pasuk says that it is an abomination to God, anyone who is gov alev, who is haughty? Something that is described as an abomination to God, I don't want to have any part of it, even the smallest amount. Omar Chizkiah, Ein tfiloso shel Adam nishma'as. A person's prayers will not be heard elo im kein meisim liboi kabasar, unless he makes his heart like flesh. Basar, we'll see a description of this in the Gemara, what the intent is in this analogy. Shenemar, the pasuk says, "V'hoy midei chodesh b'chodsho yavoy kol basar lehishtachavos." A reference made to those coming to the Beis Hamikdash to bow and pray. Omar Rabbi Zera, basar ksiv bei v'nirpa, Adam lo ksiv bei v'nirpa. When reference is made to refuah, to healing, the term basar appears in the context of healing. The term Adam does not appear in the context of healing. Even though we're essentially describing a person, the word describing a person is basar, meaning flesh, and not the word Adam. And the Gemara will now analyze these words. Before we analyze the terms basar and Adam, let us look at the Rashi, fourth wide line under the Gemara. The Gemara had mentioned that a person and his prayers will not be hearkened unto unless he makes himself like basar. So Rashi says, Shu rach, it's soft, velo ke'even, shu koshe, soft like flesh and not hard like rock. And the Gemara cited the pasuk of Yovo Kabosu Lishtachavos. Rashi says Lishtachavos Lispalel, to come and to bow, and in prayer Oisam Shehem Boser Yovo Lispalu, those that are like flesh, as we already described, soft and not hard like rock, will come and pray. Kiheim Nishmoim Lifnei Lifonai, they are the ones whose prayers I will heed. Avol Gase Haruach Lo Yovo, but the haughty, they will not come. Also, Rashi continues, Basar ksiv bei v'nirpa, quoting the pasuk in the context of Tzara'as. It says, Basar kia boi ba'oroi shchin v'nirpa. Adam kia ba'or b'sar nega tzara'as, kia ba'adam, lo ksiv b'chad minayu v'nirpa. In the pasuk where the word Adam appears, you don't find the word v'nirpa. In the pasuk in which basar appears, you do find the word v'nirpa, the word indicating healing. Lefim darkecha ata lomed. Through this you can derive shemishu rach v'onov kebasar korv l'srapos misura boin alav. Someone who is soft and humble is close to receiving healing from the yisurin, from the trials and tribulations that befall him. Avomishu kashik adama, someone who is hard like adama, like the earth. Ein refuah l'makaisav. There's no healing for his afflictions. That having been said, we now go back to the Gemara where we see an analysis of these words. The second line from the bottom, HaRav Yehonasan Adam, the word Adam is made up of the letters Aleph, Dalet, Mem, which are Rashi Tevis, which are initials for the words Efer, Dam, Mora. Ash, blood, and gall. Basar is made of the letters Beis, Shin, Resh, Busha, Srucha, Rima. Embarrassment, decay, and Rima, also a form of worms and decay. Ika Diamri, another approach to the word Basar, the middle word Srucha, has the word Sha'oil, Dechsiv Beshin. Instead of the word Srucha, which is spelled with a Samach, even though it has the same sound as a sin, some would replace it with the word Sha'oil, which means the depths or a grave, instead of the word Srucha. That way you have Beis, Shin, Resh, Busha, Sha'oil, and Rima. For a little more on this topic, we look into the Rashi. The Rashi picks up where we left off from before. Adam, Loma Nikra Shmoi Adam. Why is a person called by that word? Shu Efer Dam Mora. Klomar, Kulo Hevel. He is completely Hevel. Hevel, something that's frivolous, something of no real value. Lekach al yizgoer. Therefore, being that a person is made of ash, like of dirt, blood, and gall, there is no reason for a person to ever show haughtiness. Morahi l'chluchis mora yitzis min amrira shebekoved. The mora, a reference to gall, is that which is secreted by the gall coming forth from the liver. Umisgaberes be'odam hakol lefi hachadashim shinui itim lefi amaychel shecha v'ayodea boyin chaloyim unigoyim umachoivus yeshikorim b'divrei oroifim riro shchero v'yeshikorim riro aduma. Rashi here is elaborating on the fact that many diseases are rooted in the secretions coming forth from the liver and the gall, and there are different medical terms referring to Merira Shchura, black gall or red gall. The next Rashi says Sha'oil, Mokum Sha'oil Beso, the depths of one's house. So in the Gemara, we've seen how the term Adam is made of the words Efer, Dam, and Mora, and the message one gets from that, as we saw in the Rashi, is that there is no room for a person to be haughty. And Basar likewise communicates that sentiment, Busha, Srucha, and Rima. We continue with the bottom line of the Gemara, Amar Avashi, Kol Adam Sheish Bo Gasis Haruach L'Soif Nivchas. He who has in him this attribute of haughtiness, in the end he will be reduced from his loftiness and will become the least of men. She'ne'emar, we continue at the top of Omid Beis. As the Pasuk says, V'laseis v'lasapachas. That's a Pasuk, again, from the topic of Tzoras. And the Gemara analyzes, Ve'ein seis elo loshen gavoa. The word seis indicates something lofty. She'ne'emar ve'al kol hehorim horomim ve'al kol hagvois hanisaos. The word nisaos and the word seis have the same root, and the Pasuk makes reference to all the high mountains and hills. So you see the word laseis has to do with highness or haughtiness. The ein sapachas elo tfela, and in the same pasuk you see the word sapachas. That has to do with something that is tangential, something that is unimportant. something that attaches itself to others, but it itself lacks importance. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Safchenino elachas alkahoinos lechol pas lechem. Attach me, meaning something that's attached, not something that is of central significance in and of itself. We take a look at the Rashi. Safchenino, asfenino, benuvos beis eli mishtoikro, amid kayanim gdolim acherim, shiotzios kayanei zarachom migdulosam, v'yitztarchu levakish mem la'oisvam, u'lekoltam etzlam. So Rashi gives us the background to this pasuk, indicating that in the future the descendants of Eli will lose their significance and only be subsidiary to others. You can see we have a new marking, a double underline, which is featured under the Mivneh, the structural note. These are Meimros Shel Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. These are comments made by Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Omar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Come and see how important, how great the humble are to the Almighty. When the Holy Temple was extant, Adam makriv oilos char oila biyodo. A person would bring a burnt offering, an olah sacrifice. He would be rewarded for bringing that specific sacrifice. Minchas char mincha biyodo. If he brought a meal offering, he would get meal offering reward. Aval misha daita shvela, someone who is of humble spirit, malav akosuv, the Torah considers him ki'ilu hikriv kol hakarbonos kulam, as if he offered all of the different kinds of sacrifices. Shenemar, the pasuk says, Zivchei Elikim Ruach Nishbara. Notice the word Zivchei is the word for sacrifice in the plural form. So that Ruach Nishbara, the one of broken spirit, of humble spirit, is considered as if he offered all the different sacrifices. V'lo oid elo she'ein tfiloso nemeses. Not only that, but his prayers will not be disdained. Shenemar leiv nishbar v'nidkeh Elikim lo sivzeh. The broken-hearted and lowly-spirited individual, the Almighty will not disdain. In other words, if someone is looking for a chance for his prayers to be heard, it's most advisable that he should adopt the characteristic trait of humility. In fact, this idea we saw expressed at the very bottom of Amud Aleph. The statement was made by Chizkiah, "Ein tfiloso shel adam nishmas, elim kein meisiv liboi kebasar." A person's prayers will not be heard unless he places his heart like one of flesh, soft and humble. We continue in our Gemara. V'yomer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, kol hashom or choisav boilam hazeh. Shom, from the word maybe shuma, is familiar to some of you. That has to do with a calculation. Someone who calculates his ways, who measures his ways. In this world, will merit seeing the salvation of the Almighty. Shenemar, the pasuk says, "V'som derech arenu b'yesha elakim." Al tikri v'som. V'som means to place. Elo v'shom derech, one who calculates his ways. He will merit seeing the Yesha, the salvation of the Almighty. The Gemara in Moed Katan elaborates on this a little bit more, where Shom Derech involves people who calculate, is it really worth my while to sin and forego schar mitzvah, to forego spiritual benefit in favor of some type of immediate sinful pleasure? And likewise, it calculates the value of investing in mitzvah performance as opposed to engaging in idle activity. This kind of lifestyle involves constant evaluation and calculation, which is all encompassed by the term v'shom derech. Ketzad mekanelo v'chulei. now we go back to explaining the Mishnah that opened our Masechta, Ha Gufa Kashya. Amris, looking at the Mishnah, we find that there is an inherent difficulty, an inherent contradiction. On the one hand, it says, and by the way, notice we have a long question marking, and the topic at hand we've noted on the side under the Nosay, Nusach Shel Kinui. What's the text of the warning that a husband must issue in order for Kinui to be accomplished before the Sotah process can continue? So the Mishnah said, Omar lo bifnei shnayim al tidabri im ish ploini. The Mishnah, after saying, how is kinui done? It says, a husband says to his wife, do not speak with so-and-so. Alma dibur stirahu. It would then seem to be that speaking with so-and-so, concerning whom the husband warned his wife not to do so, that would be considered seclusion. V'hadar tani, and then when you continue reading the Mishnah, it says, Dibro imoi, if she violates that warning and speaks with the prohibited individual, adayin muteres lebeis muteres lechol b'truma. By her merely speaking with him in an open location, she's still allowed to be with her husband and allowed to continue eating truma if her husband is a Kohen. Alma dibur lo klumu. So from this part of the Mishnah, you would conclude that speaking is nothing. Omar Abaye Hochi Komar. So now Abaye presents the fuller understanding of the Mishnah, the way one should understand the Mishnah. Once again, the Mishnah began by saying, Ketzad Mekanela, how is kinui done? Well, Al Tidabri, if his warning is do not speak with so-and-so v'dibra, and she does speak. Al Tidabri v'nistra, or his warning is do not speak with so-and-so, and she goes into seclusion with him. Or Al Tistri v'dibra, or husband warns his wife, don't go into seclusion with so-and-so, and she speaks with him in the open. Adayin muteres lebeis muteres lechol b'truma. In all three of these scenarios, she does not become prohibited to her husband. She's allowed to be with her husband, and she's allowed to continue eating truma. However, nichnasa imo lebeis haseser v'shoasa kedai tuma, if she went into seclusion after hearing the husband say, Al tisteri, do not go into seclusion, and she goes into seclusion, and shuasa, and she tarries there, kedei tuma, the amount of time for intimacy to take place, asur lebeisa, v'asura lechol b'truma. That would result in her being prohibited to continue with her husband and eating truma until she actually drinks the special waters in the Beis Hamikdash. Let us glance at Rashi across from here. Omar Abai Hochi Komar. Omar Law, the expression in the Mishnah after the Mishnah said the Ketzad Mekana Law, the Omar Law Pirusha the Ketzad Mekana Law who? It's not coming to explain the question of how does kinui take place. Elatarti kotani. Rather, there are 2 points. Vochi komar omar lo tadabri v'nistro dibra. If the husband had said, do not speak with so and so, and she goes into seclusion with him, or she speaks with him in the open. Afalpi she'ovra al kinuyov, even though she violated his warning. He said, don't speak with so-and-so. Well, and she went ahead and did speak with him. So even though she violated his kinui, etzel dibur, regarding speech, im dibra imo achar kinui gomor, the al tisteri, or she spoke with him after a full-fledged warning, a proper warning, do not go in seclusion. Adayin ba'achas mishtei elu muteres l'bayla. Whether it was a full-fledged warning, al tisteri, and she spoke with so-and-so, or do not speak with so-and-so, and she went into seclusion with him. In either of those cases, she remains unaffected. she's still muteres to her husband. Avol ovra al kinui etzel stira kagon sha'omar lo al tisteri. If, however, she violated the warning by going into seclusion after having been told, after having been warned, do not go into seclusion, then the kinui takes effect, and the resultant seclusion after being told, al tisteri, would result in her being prohibited to continue with her husband and to continue eating truma if her husband was a Kohen. V'im meis choletzes. If the husband that had warned his wife not to go into seclusion with so-and-so, and she did, and before bringing his wife to the Beis HaMikdash, that man, the husband, died, leaving no children, but leaving a surviving brother. In general, without the issue of Sotah, without the issue of sinfulness, a man dies, leaving a brother, dead man leaving no children, so the surviving brother is expected to marry the widow. In other words, his sister-in-law that was left a widow. That is called yibum. In the event that the surviving brother doesn't want to marry his sister-in-law, so there is a process known as chalitza, the shoe removal ceremony, which frees her to marry whomever she wants. The Mishnah says that if the husband who had warned his wife not to be in seclusion with so-and-so, and she went into seclusion, and the husband dies, so leaving no children, there is no yibum, there is no marriage to the surviving brother, but there is shoe removal. That indicates to us that she is bound to the surviving brother, but yet the option of marrying him is non-existent. That's a bit peculiar. We have to explain this. On the side of the Gemara, we have a Nosay / Mivneh heading. You'll notice a house form, and the house form is used to highlight Rav Yosef and later Rava at the top of Daf Vav. Amai Amrinon, why is it that we say De'ein Isha Sotah Misyabemes, that there's no Yibum option for the Isha Sotah? B'mikra Demeis Baila Lifnei Shishoisa, before she had a chance to drink in the special Sotah waters that would reveal her either innocence or guilt, the husband died, so there is no Yibum. You'll see the use of diamonds with Roman numerals 1 through 3. These represent Gimel Lashonos, 3 versions V'divrei Rav Yosef, 3 versions within Rav Yosef. So now the Gemara, Amai Tisyabeim Nami Yevumi. Why does the Mishnah say that there's only chalitza, the shoe removal ceremony to release the almona? Why is yibum not presented as an option? The reason we underline this is because this is the focus of the upcoming Gemara discussion. So, Omar Rav Yosef Omar Kra v'yotza mi beiso v'holcha v'hoiso li'ish acher. The pasuk in Dvorim Perek Chof Dalid is a pasuk that's in the context, and Rashi provides you with the background of a husband that found his wife to be behaving immorally. The pasuk before, and you can see it by looking in the Rashi, it says Ki motza ba'erev davar, etc. V'yotza mi beiso. The pasuk describes a husband divorcing his wife, and it says that she then goes to an ish acher. If the purpose of the pasuk was simply to say that a man who divorces his wife, who's let's say suspected of immoral behavior, and after the divorce she's then free to marry someone else, the pasuk could have simply said v'yotza mi beisa v'hoiso leish. She leaves his house and goes to another man. Why does the pasuk add the word acher? It says leish acher. So with that issue in mind, the Gemara goes on and says, Leish acher, the woman who was, say, suspected of immoral behavior, she can marry some outsider below the yavam. So the word acher is here to serve as a limitation or an exclusion of the yavam, of the surviving brother. So she can go to marry some outsider, but not the yavam who's kind of like inside, he's part of the family. Well, if you're saying that it's a scriptural dictum that she shall not marry the yavam, so so then there should be no need for the chalitza ceremony either. Chalitza is the release of the bond between the widow and the surviving brother. But if there's no option for her to marry the surviving brother because of this pasuk, so apparently there's no bond. And if there's no bond, so then why should there be any chalitza requirement? Let's take a look at the Rashi on the 5th line under the Gemara text. The Torah exempts her from yibum and allows her to marry another man under any circumstances once she leaves this house. So that if the woman suspected of immorality is divorced, she's able to marry any other man. Why then is there any need for chalitza? Let's continue in the Gemara. Omar Le, so Rav Yosef answers Abaye, says, Ilu isei labal, if the husband was still alive, and we're dealing with the husband of a woman who behaved in a questionable fashion. If that husband was alive, this is a husband that had warned his wife not to be in seclusion with so-and-so, and she went and violated that. And that husband, let us say, wanted to divorce her. Milo bayo get, would she not, in fact, require a get? She wouldn't just be free to go with nothing. Hashtonami, now that the husband is not around, but the surviving brother is there, tipoi chalitza. We have a chalitza requirement. The chalitza requirement, in a manner of speaking, takes the place of the get, the divorce document that the original husband would have had to provide. So that even though we're dealing with a woman who behaved in a morally questionable way, she's not free to go with nothing. Something is required. If the husband himself was still around and he didn't want to go ahead with the, with the chalitza, with the Sotah process, he would divorce her with a divorce document, with a get. Likewise, with the surviving brother, chalitza is required to fully release her. V'is de Amri, another version. Omar Rav Yosef, Rachmona Omar, v'yotza mi beisa v'holcha v'oisel ish acher. When we say another version as to why is there no yibum. So Rav Yosef explains, the Torah says she leaves his house in the case of a regular husband-wife situation where the woman behaved in a immoral fashion. We say ki motza be'er v'sdovar. The husband finds some kind of questionable moral aspect to his wife. The Torah says, well, he divorces her and she leaves his house. She goes She goes to some other man. She doesn't remain with her husband, a wife who is suspected of ervas dover, of immorality. Why does she not remain with him? De lo listere lebese, so that she shouldn't destroy his house. Rashi makes reference to a Gemara that we saw quite recently on Daf Gimel Omid Beis. When there is znus, when there is immorality in the house, it's like the worm eating away destroying the karya. Karya was a type of vegetation, and in fact, in that Gemara, we saw that this type of, let's say, lewdness is the source of destruction in a household when it's practiced, when it's characteristic of the wife, of the woman of the house. So that the Torah has this expectation that in the situation, in the context of immorality, of lewdness, she should leave the house so that it's not destroyed. She shouldn't destroy his house. She shouldn't destroy the family. Better that she should go away. And you're suggesting that there should be yibum means keep her in the family. That's the reason that yibum is not an option, is not suggested. Well, with this in mind, li'acher lo tinosay de lo tisderei lebeisei. She shouldn't marry someone else either, so as not to destroy his house. Omar lei. Rav Yosef responds. We continue at the top of Daf Vov. Mika raminon lo alei bal korche. Are we imposing her on that outsider? We're not imposing her on him. So, therefore, there isn't a concern about someone else's household being destroyed. What does bother us, and hence we say there's no yibum, is if we would say that yibum is a reality, yibum is in fact it's a mitzvah that has precedence over chalitza. So that if yibum was an option, it would be tantamount to imposing her on the surviving brother, on her brother-in-law. And this idea of imposing a problematic woman, a woman who is characterized as ervas dover, as immoral, that we don't want. But leaving her free to marry someone else without the pressure, without any form of imposing, that's okay. V'ika di amri. Here we have a third version. Again, we're dealing with the issue of why is it that when the husband of the Sotah dies before she goes to the Beis HaMikdash, does the Mishnah indicate chalitza but no yibum? Omer of Yosef, hakosov koroi achir. The pasuk in Dvarim, which featured the woman who is immoral, ervas dovar, when she goes and marries someone else, it says v'holcha v'hoysa liish achir. Doesn't say just liish; it says liish achir. The word achir has a certain, we'll say, negative connotation. She'ein ze ben zugo shel rishon. Anyone who marries her, this woman that's involved with questionable morality, anyone who marries her, he's not ben zugo, he's not the equal of her first husband. In what sense? Shezeh hoitzi risha mi beiso. The original husband, seeing a woman of questionable morality, he gets rid of her. He puts her out of his house. The risha, the wicked one. V'zeh hichnis risha l'soch beiso. And the one who does marry her, so he's taking in the wickedness, the evil, into his house. V'yad amris tisyabem nami yevumi. And with this in mind, you're suggesting that the surviving brother should marry her, should do yibum with her. The whole point here is to get the risha, get the wickedness, get the evil out of your house. Why in the world would you think to suggest that there should be yibum, which means bringing her into the house? Amalei Abaye, Elomeato nises li acher umeis below bonim. Well, in the case of a woman like this, the Sotah, she, or the woman suspected of ervas dover, of immorality. Let us say she does go ahead and marry some outsider. And that outsider, that other guy, dies, he dies leaving no children. Are you going to say then, lo tisyabem da'kosuf koro acher, that there should be no yibum because he who picks her up is called an acher? An acher, we mentioned before, he's not ben zugo sharishon, he's viewed in a skeptical light. So because of that, because the one who then marries her afterwards is called acher, there should be no yibum in that scenario? The Gemara answers no. In that scenario where she had been divorced because of husband number one and ervas dovar and immorality on her part in that original household, so he gets rid of her, Mr. 2 marries her, but then the transition from Mr. 2 to his surviving brother, that's not a problem. And therefore we don't exclude Yibum in that case. Gabei Dahai, regarding her presence with that second husband, Miha B'Shem Tov Havakaima, she had a good reputation while married to him. It's true that when he picked her up, when he married her, so he was taking into his domain a woman described as Risha, as wicked, as evil. But if she didn't continue any questionable ways in her marriage to Mr. 2, upon his death, if there are no children, the surviving brother, the Yavam of Mr. 2, could in fact do Yibum. And we continue now, as you can see, the house marking, indicating a new approach. It's called the Rava's approach to why is it that there is no Yibum. Rava Omar Kal V'chomer. He uses Kal V'chomer logic. He says, Im Nesra B'mutar law, if the Sotah becomes prohibited to her husband was a person who originally was allowed to be with her husband and wife, of course. They're mutar to one another. But she became prohibited through her violation of his warning. Be'asur lo kol shekain. So then all the more so with regard to the Yavam, her brother-in-law is strictly forbidden to a sister-in-law. As we go on in the Gemara, we have a double underline marking. You can see on the side, under the Mivneh, under the structural note, we explain here, these are two nisyonos shel Abaye. These are two attempts by Abaye, lifroicha kal v'chomer shel Rava, to undo, to question the kal v'chomer of Rava. But at this point, before we go on, through Rava's kal v'chomer, we understand why Yibum is not an option. If she became prohibited to her husband, someone to whom she originally was allowed, with regard to the brother-in-law to whom she was prohibited, certainly she will not be allowed. Using this logic, Kohen Gadol, Shekidesh es Almona Umeis, a Kohen Gadol who married a widow. This, by the way, is a type of marriage that is prohibited to a Kohen Gadol. And the Kohen Gadol, he married an almona. He's supposed to marry a woman who was never married, a virgin, a basula that was never married. Well, he went ahead, this high priest did go ahead, he violated the rules, and he married an almona, and he died, leaving no children. V'yesh lo ach kohen hedyot, and there survives the Kohen Gadol a brother who's a regular Kohen Hedyot, a common Kohen. Lo tisyabem, there should be no Yibum. Based on this logic, from the way that this issue is presented, we are going to make the assumption then that, of course, there is Yibum in this case. So Abaye is pointing out that, well, according to the logic that you just presented, you Rava just presented, then the following should not result in Yibum, and yet there is. So, what was Abaye's case? The case of the Kohen Gadol that had married an almona, died leaving no children, and there's a common Kohen, a brother that survives. There should be no yibum. Based on what? In Nesra b'muter law, if she was forbidden to someone to whom she was allowed, but Ozer law lo kol shekain, to one, the brother-in-law, her brother-in-law, to whom she was forbidden, all the more so. The Gemara points out that there's a total lack of parallel. First of all, Nesra ha'asira v'kaima. In Rava's Kal V'chomer, he described the Sotah who Ne'esra became prohibited through her violating the warning she received. The case of Abaye is not reflective of a situation where she became prohibited. Ha'asira v'kaima, an almona, a widow to a Kohen Gadol, was prohibited at the outset. Furthermore, muter law. In Abaye's description, he described the Kohen Gadol Shikinish Amana as being what? Ne'esra b'mutar law. That she became prohibited to someone that she was originally allowed. But she was never originally allowed. Ozer lahu. The Kohen Gadol was prohibited from the outset. So the Gemara discounts Abaye's challenge simply on the grounds that it's not parallel to what Rava was describing. Ella. Well, try number 2, a second attempt on Abaye's part to, we'll say, discredit the Kal V'chomer of Rava. Ella, what's this? Eshes Kohen Shenen So Meis, the wife of a Kohen who was raped. And it should be understood that a Kohen, contrary to other members of Klal Yisrael, the rank and file people of Israel, Jewish men, if their wives are raped, so there's no problem with her continuing to live with her husband. Not so in the case of a Kohen. A Kohen's wife who is raped, though it's a very sad story, nevertheless the Torah prohibits the Kohen from continuing to be with his wife. So, Eishes Kohen Shenensa, a wife of a Kohen that was raped, Umeis, and then the Kohen dies, leaving no children. V'yeshlo ach cholol. And the Kohen that died has a brother. It's a brother from we'll say a common father. However, this brother had a mother that was a grusha, was a divorcee. And this father was the common father to both of them. He had married a second woman, a second wife who was prohibited to him. That brother is called a cholol. He is essentially a non-Kohen. So, a woman who was married to a legitimate Kohen, but she was raped, and the Kohen died, leaving no children, and he has a brother from a common father. And by the way, Yibum takes place only between brothers that have a father in common. He has a brother from a common father. The brother is a cholol. He is a brother that's not considered a Kohen. There should be no Yibum, lo tisyabim, there should be no Yibum. How? Im nesra b'muter law. And by the way, just like we said before, in a case like this, we are to understand that in fact there is Yibum. But with the logic of Rava, there would be no Yibum. And the fact that there is Yibum shows that Rava's logic is discredited. Now, how would the logic operate? Im nesra b'muter law, if the wife of the Kohen that was raped became forbidden to her husband, you see here the word nesra is precise. She became prohibited through the rape. So here you have a woman who became prohibited to her husband, be'oser lo kol shekain, to a brother-in-law, all the more so. She should be prohibited. The idea being that the isur of ones, the prohibition created by the rape, should end up prohibiting her to the surviving brother, to her brother, to the yavam. So the Gemara responds that this challenge to Rava's logic is rejected. Why? We just suggested that the prohibition created by the ones, which made her forbidden to someone she was allowed to be with, namely her husband, all the more so, that problem of ones, of rape, will certainly prohibit her to the yavam. And here's the catch. The Gemara goes on. Oines b'Yisrael mishra shari. We mentioned this earlier. Ones, rape, when it comes to standard Jewish men, that has no effect on their wives. If a married woman is raped, she goes back to her husband, assuming he's not a Kohen. So that ones, rape, is not the source of prohibition that would have any effect on someone that's not a Kohen. The Gabi Dehai, regarding the Cholol, the brother who was a Cholol, this Kohen's brother, in effect, he was a non-Kohen. Leko Isura. There is no prohibition. So that trying to discredit Rava's Kal V'chomer through the case of the Eishes Kohen Shenensa, and the Kohen dies, and we say that there is Yibum, fine, there's Yibum over there. There's no reason not to allow the Yibum. There is no basis for prohibiting the surviving brother. But in the case of an Isha Sotah, a woman who is suspicious of immorality after having been warned by her husband, she becomes usher to the man that she was allowed to be with, to the brother-in-law, someone to whom she's forbidden to be with, all the more so she will not become allowed. Just to highlight it might be picky-yoon on our part, but just notice a distinction between the Isha Sotah. There, the prohibition was a prohibition that is not limited to kahuna. That's a prohibition that applies to all. So that prohibition that prohibited her to her husband, all the more so she will remain prohibited to the surviving brother. But in the case of the Eishes Kohen Shenensa, we'll say the source of prohibition over there was not a problem that applies to Klal Yisrael. It was limited to a Kohen. So that problem does not affect the mitzvah of Yibum. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.